Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the MI GSO pcubed XR Lab. On behalf of the Agile community of practice, I would like to give a warm welcome to our guest speaker for the evening. Ab and I worked together about 4 years ago when we worked at Moody's together, and he's really inspired me with his technical expertise and also with the stories that he shares. So I hope that you find his speech today as inspiring as I found him in the past. And so I'd like to give a very warm welcome to Ab.
Thank you. A lot to live up to now. I've got to be inspiring and interesting and be technically savvy. So yeah, thanks for having me. I was expecting people in the room, and all this amazing technology, which is awesome, really impressive. So I have one request for you guys dialing in. If you could please keep yourselves off mute. What I want to do is have it as kind of as if you were in the room with us, because as I start to talk, I'll get tongue-tied and forget what I'm saying. So I really would appreciate it if you throw questions in, you know, mid-slide or mid-sentence even, just throw the questions in and you guys in the room. And that'll be much more interesting than just me waffling on. So as the slides there, I'm Ab. I'm an enterprise agile consultant. I'm a partner at a company called Agilicist. We're quite new. We've only been around for five or 6 years. I should know. Let's go with 5 years. And we help organizations do agile transformations, for example, where we met at Moody's. Most of our clients are either in finance or in the gambling and gaming industries. And we've recently started taking on public sector as well. So I'm personally now leading the Agile transformation at the Army Futures, the Navy and headquarters at MOD. So that's me in terms of certifications, yeah, the standard Scrum Master, product owner stuff, but ScrumatScale and SAFe also. I think that's what we want to talk about today. What I don't want to do is talk a lot about SAFe, because everyone does. And what I've been told is you guys know a lot about SAFe. And it's out there, and we all know about that. But ScrumatScale is different. ScrumatScale is different, and we're going to go through what the differences are between ScrumatScale. What the differences are, what I think the differences are, some similarities, and kind of what the world thinks the differences are. Because there are people that like SAFe, and they think what the differences are, and there are people that don't like SAFe, and what those people think the differences are. I've got a slide for training pathways, but I'll talk it through. Some parts about the future, some parts about where ScrumatScale fits in, and at the end it says Q&A and insights, but if we could keep that all the way through, I'd really appreciate throwing questions up. The harder the question, the better, I think, for me.
So I was going to say, so in terms of, that's great in terms of the agenda. Just what we're interested in as well is when to use which one, what indicators from clients, thinking about the different challenges that you might address with ScrumatScale that you might not address with SAFe, startup versus large organisations, yes, that kind of stuff. So it'd be really interested to hear.
Absolutely, yeah. I won't answer that as a whole, but I'll weave those things in at some point.
Great.
And if I haven't by the end, then do it again, and I'll do them then. So these, I purposely called this title Generally Accepted Differences, because I don't think these are the real differences. This, by the way, is what ChatGPT thinks the differences are between. Well, you could have done this yourself, but I'll do the insights. And it says that some I don't know if they're good things, like clearly defined structured framework. There is a structured framework in SAFe, and in ScrumatScale, a framework that builds the core Scrum framework. I'll go through them all really quickly, then I'll talk them through. So focuses on program management from SAFe. No focus on program management. Yeah, a lie. Planning and execution. So top-down approach to planning and execution. I don't see. That's what I mean. So people kind of poo-poo SAFe a little bit sometimes, and certainly ChatGPT seems to be. And ScrumatScale saying it's a bottom-up approach to planning. They're both top-down. They're both bottom-up. It's how you want to implement them. It says their roles and responsibility, I would say, so a clear hierarchy of roles. There's lots, that is true in SAFe, there are lots of roles, everyone has a place. Jeff Sutherland himself, when he last spoke in the UK, one of the questions was, what's the difference? And he said one thing, well, everyone's got a role, in SAFe, and I don't like the answer, but it is true. Everyone has a role in SAFe. In ScrumatScale, it's much more flexible. It's much more flexible. There are only 3 roles in ScrumatScale. There's a product owner, there's a Scrum Master, and there's the team member or developer. But they're trying to change that to team member, and that's because there are only 3 roles in Scrum officially, and all Scrum at scale, in scaled up Scrum. So I'll come back to that. Iterations and time boxes. So that fixed iteration length, or the fixed PI length, which is 3 months or 10 to 12 weeks, whatever they call it. And they don't have that time, that kind of program level time box in Scrum at scale. It is Scrum, 2 weeks, 2 weeks, or whatever, but 2 weeks, 2 weeks, 2 weeks. So Scrum at scale scales up with the people and the architecture within those people. It's more and more Scrum teams. And if you scale up a level, you're still running a Scrum team. It's a Scrum team with a Scrum Master and a product owner and your team members. And you can scale up again to Scrum Master, product owner, and team members. It doesn't scale up the iteration or the increment, which in SAFe you have the PI. That goes away. So they don't really believe in big room planning, although they're not against it, but the internet says they're against it, but they are. But they don't have that idea of big room planning. Questions, yeah?
Sorry, I know this is scale. So I want to point this in quite some way we've seen this. The reason for it is to either scale too large or scale in an organisation that is too hierarchical. So in your experience, how far?
I'll add a point to that as well.
Yeah.
So I know where you're talking about, David, which is, I won't name the client, but also where the maturity of the Scrum teams initially is quite low. So add that to David's 2 points.
Yes, okay. I'm going to jump ahead on some slides because there were some cool slides in there. Well, I'll come back to those. So, David, your question was excellent. How far can you take it? Because we know with SAFe you can take it pretty far. You get a huge PR planning. We've done them with 400 or 500 people in a big room. The idea behind Scrum at scale is that it is infinitely scalable. I'll say the beginning, but the idea is that it's infinitely scalable because, okay, where is it? Which way? This way. Okay, so there's something called the handshake formula, which you would have seen. You know, any type of stats, n times m minus 1/2, which is if 2 people handshake, if there's a room of 2 people and everyone handshakes with everyone else, there's 1 handshake. If there's 3 people, there are 3 handshakes, and it grows. 4 people, there are 6 handshakes, etc. And in that example, if there are 50 people in the room, so in your minds, think a small PI planning, 50 people in the room, there's 1,200 odd handshakes. And the idea is that everyone should be able to speak to everyone else. What have I done? But the idea of a scale-free architecture is the communication paths are not through everybody talking to everybody. The communication paths are with teams talking to teams. And ideally, with Scrum Masters talking to Scrum Masters. So if I'm a team member and I've got a dependency with another team or an issue with another team, I've got my 2 roles, a Scrum Master and a product owner, depending on whether it's a product problem or a process problem. I can go to one of those. So they know who to go to. And there is a Scrum of Scrums in Scrum at scale. Some people call Scrum at scale Scrum of Scrums. So if you ever read the, I can't remember what the publication is, the Agile publication, they call it Scrum of Scrums, but it is Scrum at scale. Scrum of Scrums is a network of people. In SAFe, the Scrum of Scrums is a meeting. In Scrum at scale, the Scrum of Scrums is the network of people. So you can map Scrum of Scrums to a PI or a train, shall we say. So in this example here, you've got, so the pictures that they use is always a pentagon to depict a team, and the idea that there's between 5 and 9 people or whatever. So they say pentagons, so there's 5 people in the team, and inside, so each of those small pentagons is 1 Scrum team. And you can see that in that example, there's 1, 2, 3, 4 Scrum teams inside a Scrum of Scrums. So in the same way that you would only have between 5 and 9 people in a team, you only have 5 to 9 teams within a Scrum of Scrums. And ad infinitum, you would have 5 or 9, you like this, Scrum of Scrums is within a SCRUMS. And you can get, at each time you go up a level, it's not up, though, it's not a hierarchy, each time you go out a level, there's no more handshakes. It's still infinitely quick, not infinitely quick, but you don't slow down the number of handshakes because you're adding more teams. There is no slowness to scaling up with ScrumatScale.
So I have a question on that. So again, my interpretation of SCRUMS is not great, which is why we've invited you and like to speak to you in the future. But when you talk about when you scale outwards, you're then a member of another Scrum team as part of that SCRUMS.
Yes.
How do you reconcile the fact that are you still running Scrum ceremonies at that level out of it?
Yeah, good question.
How do you reconcile those things?
So every team, whether you're a Scrum team, a Scrum of Scrums, and eventually there are two teams at the very top. One's called the EAT, which I'll get to, and one's called the EMS. So Executive Action Team, and this is embarrassing, I can't remember what the EMS stands for. Executive Meta Scrum. Got it. Even they are the most senior people in the organisation, or in your value stream. But the idea that in that team, they are the people that do not need to ask permission to make wholesale changes to everyone that sits underneath them. So they're quite senior. They don't need to ask permission. Even they act as a Scrum team. They have all of the Scrum most of the Scrum ceremonies. They have a daily Scrum, or something called the Scale Daily Scrum if you're at that level. So on this image, you can see that there's 1, 2, 3, 4 teams on the right-hand side, 5 teams on the left-hand side. When those teams do their daily or the daily stand-up in the morning, then one representative from each of those teams will come together and do what we would call in SAFe, the Scrum of Scrums, what they would call is the Scaled Daily Scrum. So at the team level, it's the daily Scrum, and then they do a Scale Daily Scrum. So now you've got 5 representatives on one side, 4 on the other. So we've got 9 teams, all knowing, in theory, what all of the other 9 teams can do from just 2 15-minute meetings. And then in the middle, there's a Scale Daily Scrum in the middle. So that would have the 2 senior Scrum Masters or Scale Scrum Masters, officially the Scrum of Scrums Master. It gets complicated. In the middle, and now we've got 2 people, at least, in that meeting. So now we've got a line of how do I put it? A line of a line of communication. I don't want to use the word hierarchy, but you know what I mean by hierarchy.
Yeah.
So the idea is that we want to be able to solve our problems quickly, and this is the main benefit of ScrumatScale over SAFe, is that you can solve your problems very, very quickly. You don't have to wait for the ceremonies. If you've got a problem, sounds like the A-team. If you've got a problem and you're again, I don't want to say hierarchical terms, but you're the lowest person, like you're in one of the Scrum teams and you're on the shop floor, adding value, cutting code, and you've got a problem that cannot be solved by anyone apart from the CTO of the organization. That CTO can find out about that problem today because they have their Scale Daily Scrum. They might not need to, because it might only need to go up 2 layers, and it can be solved then and go back down again. So you're never more than half a day from having your problem heard by whoever needs to hear the problem. And that's the power of ScrumatScale. You can't really do that in SAFe. There is a path, but it's a slower path.
Yeah. There's another hand up before I ask another question. I don't know who's on the call.
Yeah, I answer that. So beauty of Scrum is the concept of a product backlog that is visible and it's all prioritized relative to one another, so everyone knows what the order of priority is.
Yeah.
How does the hierarchy work in terms of different product backlogs as you go through the tiers?
Yeah, so I'm going to go back.
Sorry, we're juggling you.
Perfect.
I guess just in line with Ali's question, my question was also, so yeah, daily Scrums seem to scale, but what about like sprint planning, review, retrospective? Yeah. How do you scale those when you've got people in multiple teams? Because if the representative from one team's doing those, and then has to go sit in another,
Got it.
sit in another.
Got it. I'll try and do both of them on the same one. So in terms of backlog management, what it says here is that it's a clearly defined structure, and SAFe gives you the answers. Right? You're going to have a backlog for the team, and there's a product backlog for the program, there's a scale backlog for the value stream or for the trainer trains. We don't have that in ScrumatScale, because going back to your original question about maturity, you're going to know what you're doing in ScrumatScale. You can't be bad at Scrum and be good at ScrumatScale. You can in the other world. It's possible. It's probably not ideal. Things will fall over, but you can do it. You can take teams that aren't really very good at doing Scrum or Agile. You can put this big SAFe thing over the top of it.
Can you tell me what the class they're like?
No, you're right. But it's easy, right? It's easy to just put that framework on top of it and go, well, it works now. You're Agile. Thanks very much. Give me the money, and then off you go. You cannot do that with ScrumatScale. You've got to know how to run Scrum properly, but in order to be able to run ScrumatScale properly. So in terms of, let me see if I can find a. Let's go back to this one. So each of your Scrum of Scrums will have a backlog, but we at ScrumatScale don't define what the size of the things are in your backlog. In SAFe, you have features in one, there's capabilities in another one. And it goes down and there's stories, or story-like things in the team level backlog. We don't have that. We have one backlog, and it's, I can't remember what it stands for, but deep, so things are detailed appropriately, they're emergent, and they're prioritized. And the idea is that as you get close, like in normal Scrum, as you get closer to the teams actually delivering this work, it gets more detailed, and we know more about it, and then we can plan it in. As things are large and they're further back or further down in the backlog, it's continual backlog refinement. And that's one of the reasons why backlog refinement isn't a ceremony, isn't one of the 5 ceremonies, so the 353, isn't one of the ceremonies, because it can't be a single ceremony. There is no single time to say, well we need to refine our backlog. It's mature product owners and mature scaled product owners. So they, to map it across product manager, product owner on SAFe, product owner, scale product owner in ScrumatScale. It's a mature role, and it really is continuous backlog refinement. So one Scrum of Scrums has a single backlog. They still use value streams, so one value stream will have a single backlog, and that backlog feeds into those teams. Was there another part of the question?
How do you scale the rest of the ceremonies?
Right. Yes.
Yeah, because so when we've tried to look at it before for a large, 40 teams or something with multiple layers or layers, we don't like the hierarchical terminology. So if you've got people from one Scrum team sitting in a Scrum of Scrums and then in a Scrum of Scrums,
yes,
how do they attend all of the ceremonies that you should have in each?
Okay. Yeah. So take this example. There's 9 teams there. So say there were 4 of those Scrum of Scrumses. There were 4 of those, and then you've got almost like your 40-team scenario. You still have the idea of stable teams. So if I'm a member of a normal Scrum team, I don't go to the scaled events. One representative from my team goes to the scaled events.
That representative is in the team?
Yes.
So do they go to both?
I see. Yeah, yes, you go to both, but because it's a shared backlog, it's not as invasive on your time as it would be going to, I've got to do 5 ceremonies for this team and 5 ceremonies for my scale team. The scale team is a much, much smaller team. So in this example, the scaled daily Scrum there only has 2 people in there. And it's the 2 Scrum Masters from the 2 teams. One of those, this is where it gets a little bit complicated, but the idea that it's freely kind of, you can do it how you want. One of those Scrum Masters will be the product owner for the Scrum of Scrums. Because each Scrum team has a Scrum Master and a product owner. So you can either pull a product owner in, or you can have a scaled product owner. But you don't have a full team. doing scaled events. Whereas in SAFe, you have a full team doing scaled events. You've got you've got your normal sprint planning, you have PI planning, you have the normal daily stand-ups, you have the Scrum of Scrums and the PO sync, and you have the review, and you have the scaled review, and you have the retrospective, and you have the inspect and adapt. You don't map to a scaled event in the same way as you do at SAFe. In ScrumatScale, you just do the events that you need to do. So in one of our clients who is running ScrumatScale, they do, each team runs their sprint planning, and they do, sorry, each team runs a sprint planning, and at the Scrum of Scrums, they have scaled sprint planning, because we want to plan for the 5 teams, but we also want those 5 teams to do the stories for their plans. You don't do that for a 3-month period. You do it every sprint. So you scale plan every sprint. At the end of the sprint, teams do not do a demo or a review. They don't do that. They do it as a scaled review. So if they had to do both, they would do a normal demo to their product owner and whoever stakeholders, and then they would all come together and do a scaled one, a la SAFe. We don't do that in ScrumatScale. If it doesn't make sense, you don't need to do it. As long as there is a review and the right people see that and the right stakeholders turn up, it doesn't matter whether you do it at the team level or you do it at the scaled level, whatever's right. So yes, they would, if you played it by the book and you didn't know how to do Scrum properly, you would end up going to multiple events. But it's much more free to change the rules as is right for you.
Cool. Thanks.
Did it again. Okay, should I go back to anything we missed? So this is the difference between one's complex and one isn't complex. So SAFe 6 there, that's the big picture. And like I say, there is an answer in there. You can click through to any of these, and there's a nice long document, and it's, whether the answer's right or not, there's a lot of good stuff. Most of it is really, really good. And if you do it, it is really genuinely agile. There's a lot of poo-pooing it, saying it's not agile, it's waterfall. It's not. If you do it properly, and for me, the key is do good objectives, and you get good agility out of it, and you can generally, change as you go. The ScrumatScale framework, or their version of the big picture, is much more simple. It's 2 circles. One circle, because 2 main roles, one circle is the product owner cycle, and one is the Scrum Master. And one of them is about, in air quotes, process, and one of them is about product. So build the right thing, build the thing right, and they overlap. And that's really important, because that's all there is to it. It's very much like if you think about SAFe and we talk about objectives, it's what is the result that we're trying to achieve, and be agile to achieve that. That's great. And it's the same thing over here. It's what is the process that you want to do? Be agile or be Scrum to achieve it. I'm not going to say you have to do this and you have to do that and you've got to do it in this way, because that isn't really agile. It's, people, we respect people more than we respect the process. Rule 1 of agile, right, is people over process. And that's what ScrumatScale will give you. This is what you should try to achieve. Try to achieve delivery and frequent delivery, and try to achieve it and have an organization that is free from bureaucracy, that you can move around, you can change, you can however you want. So in a ScrumatScale, yes, you can infinitely scale it up, but also you can change it. You can change it really, really easy, really, really quickly. Imagine doing that in a SAFe environment, especially when you're not very good at Scrum in the first place, and you put SAFe in, and it's like, well, actually, we want to change everything, we want to move people around. And it's like, oh, well, we just got here, and we just learned it all, and now how we do it. But in ScrumatScale, it's much, much less of a burden to do that. So they're big pictures.
Questions, right? Alan, maybe first. Alan, what question?
Yeah, first of all, apologies if I misunderstood anything today. So obviously the concept of the product owner is they are accountable for the completeness and the order of the backlog. I think what I understood earlier was that there is a shared backlog across the Scrum of Scrums. So if every Scrum team has a product owner, who is ultimately accountable for the completeness of the order? Because there's no competing product owners.
Yeah, so if you take the, and the apologies on me if you don't understand it, not on you, obviously. But if you take the idea that there's a Scrum of Scrums with 5 teams in it, that Scrum of Scrums has a single backlog. When those backlog items are prioritized enough that they can go to the team, then they will go to the teams, and the team will have their own kind of team level backlog, which that product owner is, as you say, responsible for ensuring that it's prioritized and it's correct. However, in the same way, and like I say, there's 2 cycles there. There's a product owner cycle and the Scrum Master cycle. In the same way that you have the Scale Daily Scrum, where the Scrum Masters come together, you can do the same thing with the product owner. So there is still the idea of, I mean, say we call it the PO sync, but we still have that same idea. That, and it's not, remember, it's not 5 teams working independently on their own individual things. These are 5 teams in the same value stream. So there will be that overall prioritized order at the higher level, and the teams have their own autonomy at the team level. It's almost like when you have in SAFe, right? The team will have autonomy to change whatever they want, as long as they don't break the objectives that have been signed off. It's almost that, but we're just not breaking the backlog items in the scaled backlog. But ultimately, there's a map to the product manager, which is the scale product owner.
Does that answer your question, Alan?
It does, thanks.
Cool. And then Martin? Sorry, there.
Yeah, thanks.
I don't know where to look.
To what extent do you think, and I am looking at this a bit here, but to what extent do you think it's more important to pay closer attention to the rules with Scrum and Scale versus Scale Agile? My experience has been, because there are far fewer rules to get in Scrum and Scale, you've got to be that bit vicious you don't get any of them.
Yeah. The question's good, but the word rules is the one that got me. There are no rules in Scrum and Scale. I'll immediately say the opposite. The rule is deliver. Right. So it's Scrum, it's Agile, it's Scrum at Scale. It may not be SAFe, or what we generally accept SAFe to be. We don't do this to follow the rules. We don't do this to be agile. We do this to deliver value to our customers, or we do this to be more productive. But we do it to deliver value. And if any of the things that you do make it so you're delivering less value, don't do that. And if any of the things you do make it where you deliver more value, do more of that. It is a really simple rule. But like I say, in the example I gave earlier, if you want to change, you can change them entirely. You just don't move away from the mindset.
Yeah, so I would say that's applicable in SAFe as well. So a lot of the work that we do is, because we're a SAFe house, essentially, which is why we're trying to look at these other frameworks. We've done some work with Scrum and Scale. What we tend to do is look at what we can remove in terms of waste in the SAFe framework that isn't applicable for a particular client environment, or indeed sometimes so where there's absolutely no oversight or any visibility, we've had to implement additional governance forums, which make them less agile but implement more control.
Yeah.
Because it's always a balance between, yes, we want to be really agile, but actually now we've got 700 people off doing completely different things and they're not aligned to a strategy. And I think James put a comment in which we can't see around the particular client we're talking about. So I always think you're right, it's that balance of the ultimate goal is what we try to deliver. We try to deliver maximum value, tweak whichever framework you're using to make sure you're removing the things that are preventing you from delivering that value quicker.
Yeah, it's the I never get the order right. The shuhari of doing it, right? So implement it, understand it, get good at it, change it, and that's a much quicker process in Scrum at Scale than it is in SAFe. What's a really neat way of doing it, and our colleagues at Scrum Inc., who own Scrum at Scale, have done this and will say you can do this, is do a SAFe implementation, but run it using Scrum at Scale. And you can have the hierarchy at ScrumatScale, and you can have the idea that decision latency is reduced, right? Because that's the thing that kills projects. Right? Decision latency is, I want to do this. How do I do it? We'll go through the process and then come back, and then and that's too late. With ScrumatScale, the decision latency is there. If it takes more than, I think it's more than an average of more than 4 hours to make a decision, your project will get slower and slower and slower. So to get your question answered by whoever it is, if it's less or lower than 4 hours, then your project will get faster and faster. And ScrumatScale, it's no more than half a day for any problem. So you can put the ScrumatScale framework on top of SAFe, and you can get decisions made quickly, and that can work really, really well. Famously, John Deere, Dear John, I never get the right way around.
John Deere.
John Deere.
Dear John Letter.
Dear John Letter, yeah. No, John Deere, the tractor.
Tractors,
yeah. Did that, and they've one of the larger organisations or famous organisations that did the big switch from SAFe to ScrumatScale. Yeah, question in the room.
Just on the interdependencies, as the teams projects gets more projects.
Louder.
I'm asking on the interdependencies, rather how at ScrumatScale when the project gets more complex.
Yeah.
Right? How do you think that could be managed in terms of the work, like maybe 2 delays?
Yeah, got it.
So, if you could throw more light on, in terms of how do we handle that kind of situation, managing interdependencies, especially
yeah.
multiple teams in that ScrumatScale. Managing the multiple teams itself is increasing the coordination overhead is also one of the challenges.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, I'll repeat it. So the question was around managing dependencies. Managing dependencies in complex products and complex projects. In SAFe, there's a mechanism for doing that. How do you do that in ScrumatScale? And the answer is the same way, but faster. You do it the same way, but faster. So it's great because in PI planning, big dependency board or the program board with a red string, and that's a static board usually. And then you get to the end of PI planning. I've got all of our dependencies, something changes, and unless you digitize that board using the tool Big Agile, which is the best tool out there for doing it, then it's a static board, and you lose all of that. Or when I said earlier on that generally in ScrumatScale, there's no mention of big room planning in ScrumatScale. It doesn't mean we don't do big room planning in ScrumatScale. You can do it. You do the right thing for whatever Agile means to your organization to make delivery better. Then do big room planning. But instead of doing big room planning, they still have the idea of a program board. You still have dependencies within teams. But I'm going to throw a couple of things in. I talked about the red tape or bureaucracy of moving people around. In SAFe, that's very difficult. So we have a lot of dependencies. In ScrumatScale, the idea is don't have dependencies if you can. So it's not manage dependencies, it's reduce dependencies. And if we can reduce the dependencies by saying, well, actually, I'm always dependent on that team's always dependent on that team. Well, let's move the people, I know stable teams, but let's move it around so we can reduce the number of dependencies if we can. Minimal viable bureaucracy, I think the term is. But we should be able to move the organisation around. We got things like technical debt in ScrumatScale, it's organisational debt. If you can't move your people around easily, then you're not really, or you're a step away from being agile. So the idea is reduce the dependencies if you can, but you can't always, so you can still have that idea of the program board, but keep it digital or keep it alive. It's not just a static board they were the dependencies 2 months ago, and now we mess up because we don't know what they are. It's keep that live, and you keep it live by doing the scale daily scrums that happen every day.
And this comes back to, again, I think maturity. So we're working with a customer at the moment who their dependency management is awful. And even just getting them to talk to each other is impossible because they're still working in this siloed way. So what we're trying to do through something which is adding more bureaucracy, which we don't want to do it, we're having to add governance forums around, right, we'll run scrums every month so that this team of teams can speak to this team of teams and that team of teams and that team of teams.
Yeah.
So again, I think sometimes it comes back to the competency as well. So having less process on this side relies on having more competency. on the safe side, it's like you get away with less competency.
Yes, absolutely.
Speak.
Yes, absolutely. You get away with less. But there's also a little bit about just having the balls to do it. And it's not always about competency. It's about being allowed and having teeth in the game. So I'm putting this picture up here not because I want to talk about scale-free architecture, but an example of what we did in. I won't mention the client. I'm not sure I'm supposed to, but huge organisation. And one of the things that they said was, if we're doing Scrum at scale and we've got to go to all these meetings, I've also got to go to all of these meetings that we already have. I can't go to it. What you're doing is making me go to more meetings, and I'm not getting any more benefit out of doing it. Why are we doing that? So we did this thing that we ended up calling the spaghetti diagram, and that's why I put this picture, because it looked like this. And all it was a list of all of the meetings that senior people had to go to in order to get stuff done. And it was, I've got to go to this meeting, have a meeting with these 4 people independently, and then we all come together and have a chat about it. Right? Well, that's already something that you could reduce. And so we went through the idea of the 353, the 5 ceremonies you have in Scrum. And it doesn't have to be Scrum. It can be whatever agile. But go through those 5 ceremonies, and can you remove a meeting and replace it with this? Not do both. Can you remove a meeting and replace it with this? And it was a long, really difficult conversation. I mean, a month just to go through how we can do that. And then we kind of reduced their meetings by 90%. 90% of their meetings were gone. And now they're just running the ceremony. Then we run them slightly differently, and they don't call them by those names, but that's fine, because it's not about the rules, is it? It's about doing the right thing to enable you to deliver faster, and that's what it's about. So yes, it's about competencies, but you can't do some of that stuff in SAFe because it gives you the rules that you have to go to that meeting, you have to do that, unless you do something a bit more, unless you get to the re part of Shuhari, where you can actually make change. But you can't do that straight away. You've got to embed it. Everyone's got to learn it first. In Scrum at scale, you can kind of start doing that much quicker.
Are you interested in the fighter jet slide?
Yeah.
Because it is. I think that might be the program we're working on.
The fighter jet slide is one of the training slide. No, it just goes in the training. And the idea is that it's between. What in SAFe you call value stream? No, we still call them value streams, right? It's inside your value stream. You've got full autonomy to make changes. Sometimes we use a fighter jet. Sometimes we use a picture of an old hi-fi, the CD player on one, the tape deck on the other, and there's still like the key is that stable, right? Well, no. Known stable interfaces, always stable known interfaces, where they're the bits that stay the same, like the connection between 2 parts of the organization. Those don't change very often, hence stable. And we all know how to interact with them, hence known. But inside our bit, so I can, in that example there, I can change the cockpit. I can change the buttons and do whatever they want, as long as that button that changes the flappy wing, it still does that. So I can connect in, API or whatever, and connect into that, and that connects back up again. So that's the idea of where the value streams are. So it's sometimes very difficult to map value streams. In Scrum at scale, we do that known stable interfaces. It's a lot less exciting when now I mentioned it than the picture of the fighter jet.
It's interesting, and the reason I mentioned it is because we worked on the next gen fighter jet, where they've adopted Scrum at scale, but they basically hardly trained anyone, and then no one had ever done Scrum before, and they went, here's 80 teams working in Scrum at scale, off you go. And it was just a car crash.
Oh, it was a car crash?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I can imagine how that would be. So I want to go back to another question about scaling up and how you can do it. So just some examples. Most of these are Jeff Sutherland, Dr. Sutherland likes to go through, because in that early picture, there's 5 teams and then 5 teams. It doesn't grow naturally like that. All organisations are complicated. Otherwise, they wouldn't be going to do it at scale. Am I running out of time? So there's some examples of how you can set it up. So this is 5 Scrum of Scrumses with 19 teams with an EMS in the middle. which is kind of normal. Then you've got the meta scrum, where the question before about how to manage the product backlog, and I forgot the term from it. It's the meta scrum, and the scrum of scrums inside each of those. As the value stream of each of those 5 teams. That's how you would picture it. Like if you were to draw it as a cartoon, it would be like a grade 5 and 5. But you can do it in a much more complicated way. There's chief product owner. There's the scrum of scrums, and they don't all have to be the same size. I mean, it's not once you get to 5 teams. Some of them will have 6 or 7 teams in it, or 10 teams. It doesn't matter. In the same way that you could have a scrum team with 11 people in it. You know what the issues are with doing that, but you're like, well, I don't care about the issues because it is the right thing for me to do. So then do it, right? It's so long as you understand the reasons behind it. And then there's some really huge organizations. I think one of these is 3M, where it's absolutely huge. Maybe there it is. So you've got the executive meta scrum and the E working in a kind of different way. You've got lawyers you're not going to have a lawyer on every team, right? So you've got some specialism. So that'd be their own way of working. And you've got HR, customer relations, not working in Scrum, but they're still on there. So you can actually work with waterfall at the same time with Scrum at Scale. It's not a matter of, there's this kind of fable that Steve Jobs' official title within when they were doing Scrum at Scale was chief product owner. It wasn't, right? Whatever title you wanted, you didn't always have to be. I know I started with the only 3 roles, product owner, Scrum Master. You can have other things, as long as you're doing it right for the organization, not because that's the way we've always done. So there are lots of different ways to set up Scrum at Scale. It's not just a train and then a trainer trains. You can be really quite flexible with it. And this is not a good example. I put it not a good example there because this is, if you do a Google search of picture of Scrum at Scale, you end up with this, and this looks like a hierarchy. I don't want us to think of it as a hierarchy. It's not.
So that's one of the issues that we talked to that particular client on Tempest about, was you're basically replicating a hierarchy. But we really struggled with how you can't replicate a hierarchy if you're starting to map ceremonies to ceremonies, which is clearly wrong because we said you just reduce the ceremonies.
Yeah.
But also teams to teams, and then it just, the way it pans out in my mind, having been a project manager in the past and just knowing how organisations work with their WBS and stuff, it always seems to map back to a hierarchy. So I'd be interested just on your insights around language. So I know that you've corrected yourself a few times, and I have to do it all the time when I'm speaking to customers about rules and process, that kind of stuff. Be interested to know the kind of language you're using with customers around moving away from hierarchy, moving away from rules.
I don't often get too tied up with it. What we tend to do, what we tend to do is some organisations will like, let's just do it properly, buy the book, and then we learn, and then we're going to say, we're going to change all of the terminology. But sometimes that, they kick themselves in the arse because they take a meeting and they call it a Scale Daily Scrum, and they're we're doing Scrum at Scale, but you're not. You haven't changed anything about the meeting. You've just changed the name of it, and so it's even worse than not doing it because they thought they changed and they haven't. Yeah. So it's even worse. So sometimes going with the naming conventions probably isn't the best thing to do. It's let's change actually the mindset about it. But both SAFe and Scrum at Scale kind of employ John Kotter's idea of the dual operating system, I think he calls it, where you've got the hierarchy, and unless you're Octopus Energy, I think they're the only company I can think of that don't have the hierarchy, so completely flat, then you have to have the hierarchy because people want to get promoted, and people want to get paid more, and people want to progress their career. So have the hierarchy. People want to talk to HR, so you've got to have the hierarchy. It's there. But none of that hierarchy should come into play when delivering value or doing delivery. Then it's gone. I have an example in defence where in the organisation, not in the hierarchy. In the hierarchy, you've got a brigadier up here, and you've got a colour sergeant kind of quite down there. And in the value side of it, the colour sergeant was the product owner, that's scaled product owner, or chief product owner, should I say, and the brigadier was a team member. And the words from the brigadier to the colour sergeant was, "So what's my tasking today, sir?" Unbelievable that could happen. And it happened after 3 or 4 days. that if they can do it, the most hierarchical organisation I can think of can switch. And it's like, what's the right thing to do for value delivery? Then really anyone can do it. So I wouldn't get bogged down with naming, unless people, where it becomes difficult is if one team uses one naming convention, one team uses a different one, then yeah, let's try and get a house style. But otherwise, I wouldn't.
One of our clients, the leadership team, just changes the terminology every 3 weeks.
Yeah, and some places need to. I helped run the agile transformation at the FCA. We weren't allowed to call it agile. Because they tried it once, they tried it twice, and if you're Barclays, who I think hold the world record for the amount of times they tried it, but we couldn't call it agile. We had to, I think, call it iterative at the time. But
so we in some clients we're not allowed to use the term safe because they've read the internet.
Yeah.
Safe.
Yeah. Which is there's a lot of safe bashing.
There is.
If you do it well, it's good. So some of the differences. So it's lightweight. We've covered that it's lightweight. We've covered there's only 3 roles. It should be everyone in the organisation that are in this. It's not just the delivery people. It's not just about delivery. It is to enable delivery, but it's not just about delivery people. It's about the organisation. Flexible in the terms of we should be able to change the organisation. We should have minimal viable bureaucracy. Its decision latency is the key for getting things done, and if you can reduce the amount of time it takes to get questions answered for the teams, you're onto a winner. And the communication paths part, where in SAFe sometimes a communication path. That's something I do agree with. I don't agree with a lot of the safe bashing, but communication path is slower. That one I have to say, compared to when you run it in ScrumatScale, there's a chasm of difference between if you need to communicate and there's an issue, you can get that right up and right back down again in a day or 2 days, whereas it can take, it's almost like email chaining. It can feel like in SAFe. Some of the known organisations, there's John Deere, there's many more. But
it's interesting. John Deere is always on SAFe. So.
Is it?
Yeah.
Do they pass it between them? No, you haven't. No,
the guy, I can't remember his name, but he ran the SPC course that I ran on. He's one of the SPCTs fellow. He said that they were doing SAFe at Nokia before it was called SAFe. So that's probably what's happened.
Okay.
They've done it and then tweaked it a big one.
So Ian.
Yeah.
So you wanted a bit of kind of cool stuff about ScrumatScale as well. So this is the I can't remember what they call it, but the agile. I can't remember. But it's now, according to the stats, the fastest growing scaling methodology or scaling framework. So SAFe is still, by actual numbers, the largest. So Scaled Agile Framework, which is now at 53%. ScrumatScale, or as they call it here, SCRUMS, a rise from 9 to 28%. So from 9 to 28% means that they are the fastest growing scaling framework. And in terms of, I don't have a slide on it, but in terms of training paths, I think was one of the other things I should have covered. It is quite similar, but a lot less. It's quite similar, but a lot less complicated than the SAFe method. There's only a few training courses. There's the ScrumatScale for Scrum Masters, ScrumatScale for product owners, so Scale Product Owner, Scrum Master. And mostly you would go on the Scrum Master one that teaches you everything. You could liken that to SAFe leadership. There are also the SPC version, right? So you can become a ScrumatScale trainer. It's the same type of thing, 4 or 5 days, and you can do that. But in SAFe, you can just go on the course. You go on the course, you learn how to read the materials, and you can get through it. And in theory, anyone can do that. To become a ScrumatScale, not just a practitioner, but a trainer, teacher, transformation agent, official, it's much more involved. They want to see how you work. They want to understand the way that you present, the way that you train their materials. It's not anyone can just come on and do it. Oh, yes, anyone can, but anyone good can, right? You've got there's a more stringent kind of, we want the right people to do this. To just become qualified, then it's the same. There's a bit more of a, which is why the exams are really easy in ScrumatScale, because by the time you get to doing the exam, you've already proven yourself. I think that was it. Did I miss any other slides? No, I did not. So just that one with Jeff Sutherland about they are the key things that, according to him, process efficiency, decision latency are the two main things that make your projects overrun. We've covered decision latency, process efficiency. How much time do you spend adding value versus how much time do you spend talking about adding value? Yeah. And you divide one by the other and you've got your process efficiency. And in one methodology, there's a lot of talking about adding value, and in another one, it's just about adding value. And that's the key difference there. And as you can see, that's Jeff Sutherland, not Ken Schwab.
Thanks, Ab.
My pleasure.
Good stuff.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
I've really enjoyed that.
Yeah.